Okay, so my second question is kind of a claim that I just decided to reframe as a question. So this question is, do white Jews cause white supremacy and do they have privilege over Jews of color?
Sorry, I'm laughing because the concept that white Jews can cause white supremacy is just a little mind-boggling for a second. I just have to take that in. It's so the concept of whiteness is something that has really changed over the years. And what I find fascinating is, when it was a good thing to be white, like 70, 80 years ago in Germany, the Jews were not white, right? The Jews were this Semitic race that was not Aryan and not white, and that led to the murder of 6 million Jews, 33% of the Jewish population at the time. And now that it's a bad thing to be white, right? Now we talk about the white Jews and how Jews are white. But the concept of white Jews causing white supremacy, I just don't understand that. White supremacists kill Jews. The man who walked into the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh 4 years ago wrote a manifesto, and he was a white supremacist. He believed in replacement theory, that Jews are not white and are trying to rally people of color to commit a white genocide. So I laugh because it's like the irony of all ironies. Like, I don't get it. Now, let's clarify some things. First of all, there are Jews who have white skin and there are Jews who have dark skin, okay? And the reason for that is simply because the Jews, who all originated in one place, which is the land of Israel, what was Judea 2,000 years ago, and going back even further than that was the kingdom of Israel back, in the 8th century and 9th century before the Common Era. Jews were first exiled by the Babylonians in 586 before the Common Era to the Middle East, to the areas of Iraq, Iran. From there, they migrated to places like Yemen and the Arabian Peninsula, into North Africa, and that's how you end up with these Jews of color, right? And even down into Ethiopia, where you end up with Jews who are black, right? So you have black Jews, and then you have Middle Eastern looking Jews. And then 600 years later, after the Jews had returned to their land, they were then exiled by the Romans, and most of them were sent to Europe. And that's how you end up with Jews who today are called white Jews, right? And again, like, if you ask Jews, I never walked around identifying myself as a white person. I was Jewish. Like, that was my identity. And so we have to understand that those European Jews who ended up in Europe, right? They lived in Europe. And so they took on a lot of the ideologies of Europeans. One of those ideologies was a racist ideology. They looked down upon darker people, okay? That was, the colonialism, all of it, we could talk about it. That's what it was. And so there is an unfortunate reality that there are some Jews who ended up in Europe who adopted those ideas and do absolutely are racist, are xenophobic towards Jews of color. That doesn't mean that necessarily white Jews or Jews who have white skin are privileged and Jews who have dark skin are not privileged. There were Jews throughout the Middle East who were incredibly wealthy, incredibly prosperous. The Iraqi Jewish community, for example, was one of the wealthier communities, and these were Jews of color. And then there were also Jews in that area who were impoverished, right? Look at Iranian Jews. They also had a tremendous amount of wealth. And then there were some who didn't, right? And this is, I think, one of the bigger problems that we face is that people tend to like to paint Jews with one broad stroke, right? And say Jews are X. The thing is, Jews are like any other group of people, where you have wealthy Jews and you have poor Jews. You have really smart Jews and you have stupid Jews. Like, you have, you know what I mean? Like, you have conservative Jews and you have liberal Jews, right? You have Jews who are right-wing Zionists and you have Jews who are left-wing Zionists. And Jews don't agree on most things. In fact, within our communities, we argue about everything. And the notion that, like, somehow we're this monolith is just, it's so mind-boggling, especially if you are Jewish and you've lived in a Jewish community, because we know how much we argue about everything. So I just think people need to pull back and stop saying the Jews. And Chappelle said that in his rant, right? He said, you can't say the and the Jews together in the same sentence. And I would say, yeah, but for one simple reason, which is that we are not a monolith. We don't all think the same. We don't all live the same lives.
Yeah.
And I should also stress, just because some Jews have white skin, like that in no way absolves them of like any other form of discrimination. Like, sure, they might have a privilege in America because maybe there's certain things that they are shielded from, you know, like I'll say for me, I am a Jew who has white skin, who grew up in America, and I was never afraid of the police, which is not something that I think a lot of Black Americans would say. But I also think there's some Black Americans who would say, I've never been afraid of the police either, because they're also not a monolith, right? But I understand the privilege that might come with the color of my skin. But I would hope that like somebody wouldn't look at me and say, simply because you have white skin, therefore you are fully privileged and never suffer anything else like anti-Semitism. And I'm assuming that you wouldn't say that to, let's say, a trans person who has white skin, right? You're not going to say, well, because, I mean, you might be trans, but like you have white skin, so like you're privileged, therefore you're free of any type of discrimination. So what I find remarkable is that when it's the Jews, it's like, well, you have white skin and therefore anti-Semitism isn't a problem. And it's like, no, I can have white skin and anti-Semitism can still be a problem. The 11 people who were shot to death in Pittsburgh were Jews who had white skin.
Yep.
And that didn't stop them from being murdered for being Jewish. And so it's just, we need to stop talking about Jews as a monolith. And I don't even know how else to answer the question, because I don't understand the concept of white Jews causing white supremacy. There are white Jews that are very poor, and there are white Jews that are really, really wealthy, and everything in between. So stop looking at Jews as a monolith. Realize that anti-Semitism is a problem that plagues all of us, and realize that even internally within the Jewish community, we have our issues. And we don't necessarily support each other all the time. And there has definitely been xenophobia and racism, even within our own community. And that's something that we have to continuously deal with and face and correct. No doubt about it. So yeah, there are a lot of issues here, but I'll leave it there.